Can I welcome everyone to this very important session? My name is Helena Kennedy, Baroness Helena Kennedy. I'm a King's Counsel here in the United Kingdom, and it's my real honour to be moderating this session and to have such a distinguished panel involved in it. This session, as you know, we're marking the 25th anniversary of the WPS Agenda. The CEDAW Committee released the Advanced Addendum to the General Recommendations, particularly number 30, on women in conflict, prevention of conflict and post-conflict situations. And this online launch is being led by a really great parliamentary group, the UK's Parliamentary Group on Women, Peace and Security, and the UK Parliament's International Law, Justice and Accountability Committee. And so the thing that is really being articulated here is a vision of renewed multilateralism in women, peace and security. We only have to look around the world to see that the position of women in conflicts, the increase of conflicts, the horror of so many conflicts of the most grievous kind, and how they're particularly affecting women and the lives of women. The addendum, along with the background paper, have been included for you, and they really do document pressing global challenges in a really complex international security landscape. The hopes for peace seem to be really diminished at the moment, but we have to keep believing that we can improve things and work towards peace. The addendum and its companion paper respond to the changing face of conflict. And it is changing. The whole business of technology is changing the ways in which wars are conducted. The growing security threats there are, and overlapping gendered power imbalances. So this addendum seeks to broaden our understanding of gender-sensitive interpretations of cross-cutting Security Council resolutions. So here we are, we're coming together. We're linking up the relevant international law, the relevant international human rights law and humanitarian law frameworks, and CEDAW is at the heart of doing that. And so this call to action is to states and to non-state actors alike, including the business sector, and it underscores the risks posed by the weaponization of emerging technologies. I mean, I heard evidence only recently on a House of Lords committee of the ways in which AI is helping to really clearly identify, use facial recognition and other identity mechanisms in order to direct warheads at and drones at particular targets. And that includes operating on the basis of the age of the recipients, the gender of the recipients, and the targeting and the satellite use is highly defined nowadays. And I saw satellite imagery, where you could really read the time on someone's watch. It was so specific. And so we know that changes the nature of warfare. But we also have the feminization of food insecurity. There's the whole issue of conflict minerals. The Congo is a particular area to look at there, where the mines are many of them being mined by people who are really just adolescents, children, and but also run by militias who in turn abuse and violate and rape women and children in the region. The existential crisis of climate change, nuclear armament and the threats increasingly of the use of nuclear arms, the militarization of space and privatization of space, the continuing impunity for gender and sexual violence, including forced marriage, forced pregnancy and reproductive violence. And so the Advance Addendum highlights intergenerational moral, material and structural reparations, while bringing to the forefront a survivor-centric approach to justice. And it really is about putting at the heart of processes the survivor, the victim, the people at the receiving end of so many of these horrors. It also explores the generational rollbacks and we're seeing them around the world in women's rights and how shrinking civic spaces imperil the foundations of peace and security. The addendum reinforces the interconnected nature of today's security challenges and responses. The interdependency informs an ambitious set of norms built on the bedrock of women's full and equal treatment and meaningful participation in conflict resolution and in peace building. It shifts the focus from victimhood to an understanding of women's agency and leadership and the role that they can play at the peacemaking tables in conflict prevention and peace building. It calls upon state parties, multilateral institutions, and all stakeholders to translate the promise of the UNSCR in 1325 agenda into action during, before, and post-conflict. And I'm afraid there's no signs that that has been happening adequately up until now. So let me just introduce you to my panel of guests who are going to speak to you. My colleague from the House of Lords, Baroness Hodgson of Abinger, who is the chair of the UK's all-party parliamentary group on women, peace and security. There's Pramila Patten, the Under-Secretary General of the UNSCR's she's a UNSCR's Special Representative for Sexual Violence in Armed Conflict. Pramila, iconic and important figure in our midst. Hina Gilani, the first Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General on Human Rights Defenders and a member of the Elders, and currently serves as the President of the World Organization Against Torture and co-chair of the World Refugee Council. She also sits on my council at the International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute, of which I'm the director. She's the most remarkable woman. Ambassador Melan Verveer, the first ambassador at large for global women's issues under the Obama administration and founding director of the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security, and another great colleague. Radhika Kumaraswamy, former UN Under-Secretary General and Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict. An issue very close to my own heart because I'm co-chairing the Bring Kids Back project. I'm co-chairing it with the chef de cabinet of President Zelensky, really looking at the horrible war crime of taking children and displacing them and abducting them across borders. And we've seen that happening with Russia's taking of so many thousands of children from Ukraine into the wide expanses of Russia and the difficulty in recovering those children. We have with us Stephen Rapp, a former US Ambassador at Large for War Crimes and the Chief Prosecutor of the Special Court for Sierra Leone, and a really influential and important figure in international law. We're also you're going to hear from Evelina Okab, who's the Senior Program Lawyer at IBARI. But we have three. We have Nala Haidar, Chairperson of the CEDAW Committee with us. And we have Professor Rangita de Silva de Alves, who I can't begin to tell you is a powerhouse in the whole business of women's rights globally. Her voice has become absolutely preeminent, and she is tireless in the work that she has been doing on women's rights and on the whole issue of peace and security. She's a CEDAW committee member, co-chair of WPS, drafter of the WPS Addendum, and she's a distinguished faculty lawyer in the law and global leadership role at the University of Pennsylvania's Law School and at Wharton. And let me tell you, again, I have the great good fortune of having her on the council of the International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute. And she is one of the most important voices on all these issues concerning women. And I'm just going to mention also that we have three videos that you're going to see at the end of this session. And the videos are coming from, I'm just going to let you hear. We've got a video that's coming from Fumsile Lambo Nguka, who is the former Vice President of South Africa, former head of UN Women. And she wasn't able to join us, but she has prepared a video that you will hear from. Let me just move on to the other videos, we're going to have, have I mentioned Nicole Ameline, the former Minister of Gender Equity for France, and a CEDAW committee member and rapporteur of GR40, because she's with us too, and I'm so grateful to her for joining us. But let me just mention the videos. We will play, apparently we're also, the videos will be attached and you'll be able to see them after the event, but we will play Milan Vivier's video. Milan, I want to thank Ambassador Milan Vivier, the first ambassador at large for global women's issues, as I mentioned, under the Obama administration. There will also be a video from Irina Bokova, the former Director General of UNESCO, and as I said, from Fumzile. Irina Bokova has produced for us a really lovely video, and as I say, we will be able to watch them after the event, as well as the video from Ambassador Verveer. So can I, first of all, then, call upon my colleague, Fiona. Fiona Hodgson, would you like to kick us off with a statement about this addendum?
Thank you very much, Helena, and thank you for your warm introduction. And I feel very honoured to be speaking on this panel of such amazing women.
Amazing.
So I think we said it all when we said that we are marking the 25th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325. We're not celebrating it. And the sad fact is that although we were so pleased to have this UN Security Council resolution that for the first time acknowledged the disproportionate effect of conflict on women, the awful truth is that the effects of it, the impact of it, hasn't been strong enough. And in fact, in recent years, it's been rolling backwards. Now, we also, on the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Women, Peace and Security in London, we also had an event, again, to mark this occasion. And we celebrated particularly the people who'd made this happen, because they had to really push to get this through the Security Council. And we're incredibly grateful to them. And it did give us a framework with its 4 pillars of prevention, protection, participation, and relief and recovery to look at this whole agenda with. So I'm delighted to hear about the CEDAW's transformative WPS Addendum, pressing the global challenges in an increasingly complex international peace and security landscape, as Helena has outlined. I think in the UK, one of the ways that we helped on this agenda was that our Foreign Secretary at the time, William Hague, launched the Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict initiative. And that certainly really shone a spotlight, because really it is part of the whole women, peace and security agenda. And for a while, he managed to get all sorts of people to focus on this. But the truth was that after he'd stepped down, although we had some really good Prime Minister's special representatives for this, it was hard to hold on to the attention in the way that he'd managed to bring the global spotlight on this. So as I've been chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Women, Peace and Security for quite some time, and I've been concerned about this agenda and where it was going, what was going to happen to it. And I realized that to a large extent, it was dependent on political goodwill. So because the Security Council resolutions are a should, and therefore I realized that to ensure the continuation, that it needed some kind of legislation to make it a must, not a should. So in 2022, I introduced the Women, Peace and Security Bill into the House of Lords as a private member's bill. It was supported around the House. I don't think any party spoke against it. But unfortunately, the government at the time, which was the Conservative government, and I sit as a Conservative member of the House, they did not support it, and it eventually ran out of time. However, the opposition minister of the day, Lord Collins, had said he would support it. So in 2024, when Labour won the election, I reintroduced it. But unfortunately, by then, the Labour Party had decided that perhaps they weren't going to support it either. But basically, the bill is quite simple. It flips all the Security Council resolutions into law. So instead of being just a should, they are a must. And it really would nail into the DNA all the issues we look at on in UN Security Council Resolution 1325. Again, when I introduced it at the second reading, it got support from round the House, but as I've said, unfortunately, the government has changed its mind about supporting it. It has now gone down to the House of Commons, and Sarah Champion, who's a Labour MP, is taking it through the House of Commons, and she's also chairman of the Select Committee on International Development, so she's very, very well placed to do this. But I gather that private members' bills are easy to kill in the House of Commons, and I've been told not to expect much progress from down there, and I find it very, very disappointing that the UK is not behind this bill, because, as we all know, the UK is a penholder at the Security Council on women, peace and security. And we often talk as a government about leading the world on this agenda. And I really hope that the government will want to support this bill, if only to encourage other countries to follow suit, because there's no doubt that legislation is much more powerful, national legislation, and holds people to account. And I know that I have eminent lawyers on here who can talk to the legal aspects of this much more eloquently than me. However, I think one should never give up. So until the bill has been killed, I will still be trying to push it and encourage people to support it. So I guess watch this space. But anyway, I'm so glad to be speaking today with you all, because I think it's terribly important that we should highlight 1325 and the fact that, as Helena has said, with warfare becoming ever more complex, we need this resolution and this protection for women more than ever. Thank you very much.
Fiona, thank you so much. And Fiona's had been a really powerful voice on this issue and bringing it up as often as she can in our Parliament. The truth is that private member bills are not ones that are often taken up, and it's not because people are not in favour of them. It's just that they've drawn up their own agenda of bills that they want to get through Parliament, and it's about availing themselves of time, and they also want to be seen to take ownership of issues rather than having them come from private individual members. So if there is a foreign affairs bill or a defence bill were coming through, which is other things, we could add this on, and we're looking where Fiona and myself and others are looking for ways of doing that, even if her bill doesn't get through. But one of the heartening things I should say is that that sexual violence in conflict is actually being seriously investigated in Ukraine, and they've really put it high on the agenda of war crimes, and so it's not being neglected, certainly in that particular conflict. I do think, though, when we're talking about the ending of certain conflicts, I'm not seeing the names of women being put forward as being involved in any of these committees, whether it's President Trump's 26-point program for the ending of the war in Gaza, the Israeli-Gaza conflict. I don't see any women's names on the committees, and I don't see women's names being raised or issues to do with women and children being raised in the solutions being presented in relation to Ukraine either. And God knows about what's happening in Sudan. Anyway, I'm going to move us on to Pramila. Pramila, it's wonderful seeing you here, and what a privilege to have this opportunity of hearing your views.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Baroness. It's an honor to participate in this very interesting discussion. Just to say that my mandate as Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict was created by the United Nations Security Council in 2009, precisely in response to a brutal reality of modern war, namely the use of sexual violence as a tactic of war, torture, terror, and political repression. And in the implementation of this mandate, I greatly value the partnership forged with the CEDAW Committee, pursuant to a framework of cooperation that we signed in 2018, to address the underlying causes, root causes, and invisible drivers of sexual violence, such as gender inequality and discrimination. And I'm pleased that these concerns have been increasingly integrated into the committee's observations over the past 15 years. I mean, it's true that we cannot celebrate. We are commemorating the 25 years of Resolution 1325. And my mandate was also built on the foundational resolution on women, peace, and security, Resolution 1325. And as we mark its quarter-century anniversary, we are really compelled to reflect on new and emerging threats, which you, Baroness, you have mentioned a number of them, to women's peace and security. And indeed, the addendum, which is under discussion, is a response to the changing nature of conflict and crisis in the 15 years since the advent of General Recommendation 30, which I helped frame as a member of the CEDAW Committee and chairperson of the working group. And I really wish to express at this point, express my sincere gratitude to current CEDAW experts, including Rangita de Silva de Alves, for pursuing this very important work and elaborating this addendum, which is crucial to adapting to evolving conflict dynamics. Today, my mandate has expanded to cover 21 situations of concern where patterns of conflict-related sexual violence have been documented. And in our latest report covering the year 2024, the UN has verified 4,600 cases, reflecting 87% increase from 2 years ago. And more than 90% of the victims were women and girls, as has consistently been the case in every report since the inception of the mandate. What we are noting is, in terms of emerging trends, is a rise in the level of brutality, with rapes increasingly followed by lethal violence to silence the victims before their information can become evidence. We know there can be no security without women's security, yet we are witnessing a rollback and reversal of gender equality gains. We speak of prevention while military spending has reached a record-breaking 2.7 trillion. We speak of protection, yet sexual violence persists with impunity and reprisals against women's rights defenders being on the rise. We speak of participation, yet the corridors of power, councils of war, and negotiating tables are haunted by the absence of women. We speak of relief and recovery as women's frontline organizations face catastrophic cuts, with half facing closures within the next 6 months. And I must say that against this backdrop, General Recommendation 30 interprets the binding obligations of states parties to CEDAW to apply across contexts of fragility, conflict, and post-conflict, recognizing that social upheavals exacerbate inequality, intensify gender-based violence, and impede access to essential services. In the 15 years since its adoption, our collective understanding of conflict drivers and dynamics has deepened, while new threats and forms of harm have surfaced. And the proposed addendum aims to really update, expand, and sharpen the authoritative guidance reflected in GR 30. For instance, it will enable conflict-related sexual violence to be more effectively integrated into periodic CEDAW reporting, as well as exceptional reports, helping to close critical gaps in terms of information and action. The addendum reflects the evolution of normative standards in the Security Council since 2013. For instance, the adoption of Resolution 2467 of 2019, which spelled out the importance of a survivor-centered approach, as well as evolving human rights jurisprudence. It has the potential to bring into focus a more diverse range of perpetrators implicated in war crimes against women, including state actors, non-state actors, criminal and trafficking networks, violent extremist groups, militias, and mercenaries. It strengthens obligations in terms of structural prevention, including through gender-responsive security sector reform, preventive diplomacy, and the activation of early warning signals. Above all, it will strengthen national implementation, including through legislative reform and the integration of women's rights into transitional justice, emphasizing the importance of reparations and the preservation of survivor narratives as part of historical memory. And this signals that survivors' recovery is central, not incidental to conflict recovery. And this initiative, I must say, comes at a time when impunity and implementation gaps are widening. It comes at a time when emerging technology is being weaponized, civic space is shrinking, poverty and food insecurity are increasingly feminized, and the existential threat of climate change is ever more acute. It also comes at a time when conflicts and coups are turning back the clock on women's rights. It is precisely because of these challenges that the addendum cannot come soon enough as a normative anchor for holding parties accountable. Robust international norms have a powerful restraining influence on the behavior of belligerents. And by increasing the scope and credibility of consequences, they do have a deterrent effect. And that at this pivotal moment, we need to build on progress, not rest on or reverse it. In that respect, CEDAW and the WPS agenda are not two tracks, but rather one road leading to equality, stability, and peace. And in conclusion, I urge states to support the addendum and encourage survivors and civil society organizations to meaningfully engage in the process to ensure that it reflects diverse lived realities. Adoption will be the start, not the end of this process, which should spur states to match rhetoric with resolve and resources. And it's only by harnessing the normative and diplomatic tools at our disposal that we can empower to not only survive the conflict, to empower women to not only survive the conflict, but shape the peace. Thank you.
Pramila, what an amazing presentation, because you've covered so much ground in it, and I hope if it is in a written form that you might share it with us, because I think it was a really wonderful presentation about the challenges that we're facing in our current world, and it pays tribute to the addendum that Rangita has worked on so carefully. I really, it would be wonderful to have a copy of that we can circulate to other. Thank you. It was wonderful. Great. Rangita, I hope that there is enough tribute to you for the incredible addendum that you have created, because it really is bringing us up short about the retreat from many of the gains that had been made, but the resolution to carry on and to actually advance the role that women must play in the securing of peace as we go forward. So I really want to pay a fulsome tribute to you for an exceptional piece of work. Rangita, over to you.
Thank you, Baroness Kennedy, Baroness Hodgson, and esteemed speakers. This event is a tribute to your leadership and your vision. I first of all applaud the UK's Women, Peace and Security Bill, co-sponsored by Baroness Hodgson, and which is built on the cornerstone of justice for survivors. The new Advance Addendum is founded on the landmark GR30, led by USG Pramila Patten, then CEDAW member, and is rooted in a survivor-centered principle, the right to dignity, the shifting of shame and stigma to the perpetrator, and the unassailable truth that survivors are chief protagonists in justice processes, including in the collection of evidence. In response to the rapidly changing face of conflict, the addendum weaves together a tapestry of existing legal obligations as provided under international humanitarian law, international human rights law, and international criminal law, exactly the way in which Professor Christine Chinking articulated in the February all-party parliamentary group on WPS briefing to UK parliamentarians led by Baroness Hodgson. The addendum's cardinal bedrock principle is the emphasis on survivor-centered women's empowerment, in line with that Professor Chinking called for at the UK parliamentary meeting. Baroness Kennedy, you have told the UK Parliament that the world's collective inaction has ushered in an age of impunity. The new addendum's goal is to pierce that veil of impunity. The UN Charter was built on the principle of saving succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Today, we are in the grips of some of the deadliest conflicts and crises. We also come together at a time of the reversal of generational gains of women's and girls' human rights, a backlash against feminism, threats to the rules-based global order, and the shrinking of the civic space, which continue to have a chilling effect on women and women's human rights defenders. Radhika Kumaraswamy, who authored the global study of 1325 exactly 10 years ago, reminds us of the political economy of conflict. While global military spending rose significantly in 2024 to an all-time high to 2.7 trillion, while women's health care remains dramatically underfunded. It was once said that every gun that is made is a theft from those who hunger and are not fed. The addendum calls for a renewed multilateralism, as was said before, and raises profound fears of the pushback against women's rights, along with the existential challenge of climate change and the potential weaponization of technology. The next 25 years will see enormous change. Artificial intelligence will make conflict more lethal. AI-enabled cyber attacks and AI-enabled decision-making can transform conflict and develop new tactics of warfare. The growing digital gender divide is excluding women in decision-making while ignoring the gendered aspects of AI-facilitated nuclear weapons, including lethal autonomous weapon systems or laws. The emergence of new challenges include maritime security, the space race, and the militarization of space. The addendum also calls for the accountability of state and non-state actors, including transnational actors, to exercise due diligence in conflict prevention as the bedrock of the WPS agenda by addressing historical power structures through a transformative and feminist approach. A few examples of paradigm shifts in the addendum. The addendum introduces a new category of violence, that of conflict-related intellectual violence, the intentional and systematic denial of education based on gender grounds, and the willful impediments to women's autonomy, dignity, and empowerment, gives rise to a new framing of WPS. I often ask, what is it about a girl with a book that so frightens a man with a gun? It is because women's education is a vaccine against misogyny. The deliberate exclusion of women and girls from education and the erasure of women in the public sphere push us to reimagine that women's bodies are not the only battlegrounds. Women's minds are battlegrounds as well. That brings us to the evolving concept of gender apartheid, building on CEDAW's GR40, which calls upon the Draft Convention on Crimes Against Humanity to codify gender apartheid as an institutionalized regime of systematic oppression and domination of one gender over another. The addendum hearkens us to name a crime yet to be named that strikes at our consciousness and our common humanity. Along with the rapid growth of the military industry complex, the illicit trade of small arms and light weapons threatens global peace and disproportionately affects women and girls. In 2024, the UN Secretary General stressed that arms transfers serve as an early warning of conflict-related sexual violence. Conflict minerals such as 3Ts and G, tin, tungsten, titanium and gold, mined to meet the dizzying speed of the AI race and the rise of the global tech industry, must be recognized as drivers of conflict and sexual violence in conflict. The addendum for the first time highlights the nexus between WPS and UN Security Council Resolution 2347, which condemns the destruction of cultural heritage and the threats against women cultural rights defenders. It also highlights the families of the missing and the disappeared. At the same time, the shadow of impunity continues to loom large. Sexual violence is still the oldest and the least condemned crimes and remains history's greatest silence. The addendum shines a light on the expanding categories of conflict-related sexual violence, including forced nudity and forced marriage and children born of rape. While war is still waged on women's bodies, as Raphael Lemkin once said, war is not carried out by arms alone. Starvation in war is not limited solely to the deprivation of food. It includes other objects indispensable for women's survival, such as gynecological care, reproductive care, and menstrual hygiene products. The Janus face of food insecurity and that of food production is that of a woman. The intentional use of food insecurity as a tool of warfare and the willful denial of access to humanitarian aid violates the WPS agenda, while the deliberate targeting of civilians, crops, water sources push fragile communities towards famine. Sounding the alarm on nuclear armaments, the UN Secretary General has warned that humanity is on a knife's edge. The addendum emphasizes that the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty recognizes the gendered effects of radiation and the physical and psychological toll of nuclear production and testing on women and girls. At the same time, cyberspace has become a new battleground as AI advances at warp speed. The growing digital gender divide is excluding women from decision-making and in peace building, while the integration of new technologies in warfare also risks potentially magnifying and amplifying the gendered biases embedded in the data. Disinformation, fake news, and deep fake are deplatforming women in political and public leadership, creating a chilling effect on women's participation in peace building. While the recent UN Cybercrime Convention includes sexualized crimes such as cyber trafficking, the Secretary General has called for a legally binding instrument by 2026 to regulate AI-driven lethal autonomous weapons that function without human control and is repugnant to international humanitarian law and human rights. Whether in lethal autonomous weapon systems or in drones, the integration of new technologies in warfare risks potentially magnifying and digitizing gendered biases. On those same lines, on new international norm creation to address new challenges, the addendum addresses the role of women at the nexus of conflict and climate change. The recent ICJ advisory opinion cited GR 37 of the CEDAW in emphasizing the disproportionate impact on climate change on women and the doctrine of state responsibility. The recent Inter-American Court of Human Rights, in addressing the human rights to a clean environment, also highlighted the intensification of gender-based violence, including child marriage, during climate change. While a survivor-centric and gender-centric approach to justice must provide remedies that address material, moral, and transgenerational damage suffered by victims of gender violence and the children born of rape, such reparations must go beyond individual redress to address the structural inequalities that contributed to conflict in the first place. The primacy of women's leadership, the preservation of historical memory, including memorials in the image of both women and men, can help guarantee the non-repetition of crimes, never again. Grounded in GR 30's transformative ethos, this addendum calls for multilateral action and a new set of inquiries to animate the Women, Peace and Security Bills, including the UK Bill, peace plans, transitional justice, national action plans, and new UN Security Council resolutions. Baroness Kennedy, Today, you amplify our voices in speaking on behalf of a new addendum that calls for a shift from an age of impunity to reach a higher moral ground, an age that we will usher in on women's leadership in justice, in accountability, in reparations, and in the prevention of conflict and war. Thank you.
Well, what an inspirational piece of work you've done. And you're always so inspirational in the way that you speak. I will take away with me a number of the things you've said, but I shall always carry with me the idea is, what is it about a girl with a book that so frightens a man with a gun? And it's basically about the fact that powerful women and women who just might have things to add to peacemaking are often sidelined because those fears still exist even amongst men who don't carry guns. But thank you, Rangita. That was a really wonderful contribution. Now, I'm going to turn to Radhika because I think Hina's still not with us and may not actually be coming through. It might be that she's having difficulties. But Radhika Kumaraswamy, a former UN Under-Secretary General and Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict. Radhika, it's wonderful to have you with us. Can I turn to you next? Would that be okay?
Thank you. So let me just thank the International Bar Association for bringing us all together, as well as the British parliamentarians who are so active in this sphere. We are here to celebrate 25 years of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, and most importantly, to launch this very brilliant addendum to GR 30 of CEDAW, which attempts to bring the women, peace and security agenda up to the contemporary needs of the contemporary world. But perhaps it's always important to remember where this all began. It began in the wars of Bosnia and Rwanda with the situation of unbridled cruelty. Security Council Resolution 1325 was a major landmark. And I still remember, I'm old enough, the unanimous applause and that it received when it was passed, because there was so much hope and so much belief in it. And at that time, even all the super powers were all united, and it was a very important moment in the history of the Security Council. Of course, it brought forward the principles of prevention, participation, protection, and peace building, its 4 pillars. But of course, initially the focus was on sexual violence because of the terrible things that had gone on in Bosnia and Rwanda. And now we can see with the great presentation by Pramila Patten how it has developed into an important part of the core work of the United Nations, that it was earlier completely invisible, but now there is a process to deal with it, though whether it's very successful, one can judge. I remember interviewing the first woman who ever gave testimony on sexual violence at the international level at the Arusha Tribunal. She was not named JJ to keep her anonymity. And she was, while she was giving her testimony, she told me that Akeyesu, the mayor, was making hand threats throughout the testimony, and that nobody else understood except the Rwandans in the room, and how intimidated she felt and frightened. So we must understand the people who come forward on these issues, the victims, and what bravery it takes. And I found it interesting that other women said they couldn't come because of the threats on their children, but they wanted these men punished, whether it's for genocide or crimes against humanity. They wanted them punished, even if they could not come forward. So this is why people have been thinking of other issues like transformative justice to deal with these kinds of issues where women cannot come forward. We have an elaborate ICC framework, the state-of-the-art thing on sexual violence, but very few cases. So this is also time. Even when I was the lead author on the 1325 15-year review, we were wondering what we can do, and we were coming up with the possibility of trying and working with the concept of transformative justice when it comes to sexual violence. The other very important area that was focused on was participation. Women's peace and security advocates struggled from all over the world to push for participation of women in peace processes and military formations, and I would say with minimum success. There have been some successful, such as Colombia and others, but still very far below, still very much a boys' club. Not realizing that if you want peace to last, you need to have the women in there. And that research has shown us over and over again. So these were the conflicts that were the traditional areas. One of the things we did mention in that 15-year report, and which the addendum also mentions, is that when we interviewed people from the developing countries, they wanted not only participation in sexual violence, but they wanted post-conflict livelihood and peace building. And they wanted, to some extent, not only individual livelihood, but community development. So how we can work that into the future of women, peace, and security is also important. These are all the issues that we would say were the earlier issues of the agenda. But now I think we have to see that technology and other things have completely changed the nature of warfare, and we're struggling to make it relevant, make our work relevant. I was on the fact-finding mission on Ethiopia and Afghanistan. So and of course, I was also special rapporteur on violence against women. And unmanned weapons of war are very, very serious weapons. They can have untold destruction. And the thing is, we have no regulation whatsoever. When we were in Ethiopia, the low-grade destruction done by the weapons of war, like drones, was just absolutely devastating. So I think we have to push toward, and also the highly sophisticated in Gaza and Ukraine. And what's interesting about these weapons is that it's not strong versus weak. The weak now also have access to drones. So they can also add to in a way, it's a great equalizer and the anarchy of destruction. So it's really important that as part of this, we push toward an international instrument on autonomous weapons that sets the standards and that can regulate the use of that weaponry. I think that is the need of the hour. Secondly, as the addendum says, starvation suddenly has become a major weapon of war. And the addendum shows the feminization of food security, the need to really go at this frontally as a crime against humanity, sometimes being persecution or even genocide. There's increasing jurisprudence, but there is another new area that seems to have developed. The other area that in my work is fact-finding missions in Ethiopia, Myanmar, that in the early phases, medical spaces were safe zones. Medical workers were, even in Afghanistan, medical workers were protected people. People would not attack medical workers or hospitals. Even if combatants, the idea was the troops should lay siege or ground troops come in, that you would not put doctors and patients at risk. But recently there has been a lot of bombing of hospitals. And this is a serious issue. So how we are going to deal with this medical issue and dealing with making medical spaces safe is also, I think, very important, because as we saw in what is taking place in Gaza, Ukraine, there is women and girls who often are at the receiving end when these safe spaces are attacked. The Geneva Conventions are based on 3 principles: the distinction between combat and civilians, and this is meant primarily to protect women and children. They're supposed to be given the highest protection. And it is also based on the principle of proportionality. But my sense, especially in the last few years, that proportionality is being replaced by a philosophy of shock and awe. If someone begins a war, if there's the issue is not to give proportional force, but to give shock and awe and to basically, shall we say, intimidate or terrify. So I think this is also, we have to bring back proportionality as a framework of law, otherwise we'll destroy ourselves. And that's related to the third principle, which is the principle of precaution. That is also the International Committee of the Red Cross meets with armies regularly, try to bring these principles back and to work with them. And I think we should support them in doing these work. And finally, one of the areas I think we should think of refugees and asylum seekers, women refugees. I was in Cox's Bazar with Myanmar refugee women talking about terrible sexual violence. They were all sort of clutching their documents more than some of the richer women left all their jewelry, all their beautiful clothes behind. The only thing in their hand, which is literally molded into their hand, were the documents they were clutching, because that was what would give them status. That is what makes them have identity. But the doors are closing for these women and for many people who are refugees and migrants. And we have to come with new solutions, because in these camps, there's now a lot of violence in Cox's Bazar. The young men are getting radicalized. As we know, the Taliban came out of Afghanistan absolutely radicalized from the camps. So this is not only an issue that's about minorities and camps, it's also a world issue with regard to how we deal with issues of radicalization. So finally, I'll just say we have to move forward on this. Is, I think, one of the most important issues that women face. It should be center stage in our advocacy. And we need to make a commitment for funding for these work, commitment to multilateralism. What I found really heartening was this peace plan on Gaza and Israel. It wasn't the coalition of the willing or some abstract. They brought it back to the United Nations. And I think that was a sign of confidence. It is the United Nations Security Council that is creating the framework for this peace plan. So we must strengthen multilateralism, and we must strengthen the commitment of civic spaces and civil society to give texture and strength to multilateralism. Thank you.
Radhika, wonderful. Really, your experience is so important to us. Describing as you do your own work and your own visits to places, and the importance of multilateralism. We can't do this alone. It has to be coming together of states and participants and campaigners and advocates and so on. We really have to keep this, run this up to the top of the agenda. And like you, I was heartened that the plan for Gaza, which has lots of things that are missing in my view, but at least it went all the way to the Security Council, and embracing and drawing in the UN was really important. So can I then take us to Nala Haidar, who's the chairperson of CEDAW. And Nala, it's just great having you here with us. The Queen of CEDAW, come and speak to us.
Oh, thank you very much, Baroness. Both Baroness, the IBA was so known for initially, I was supposed to become a lawyer in my country, Lebanon. So it was always my dream to work also within a network like the IBA. but I was compensated throughout my life, and I was a UN staff for almost 3 decades. That's when, as a humanitarian officer, I really looked at the issue from the field, from Rwanda, from the hills of Rwanda during the Gacaca process. I was an observer from the former Yugoslavia, different contexts, all what was discussed. And it was at the time so difficult to understand what we are going to be facing, because we were concentrating on international humanitarian law and we did not really enter the arena of international human rights. And here I am after many years, member of CEDAW, learning a lot from Pramila, working with her at the time when she had adopted her wonderful and very landmark tool, our GR30. And later on, having the chance to welcome Professor Rangita to the committee, because it has always been on my mind. What are we going to do? We're going to continue business as usual in a world that is completely disrupted. But until I met Rangita, I couldn't see the dream become reality and have the addendum that we have. Thanks to Rangita and to her commitment and to the hard work and to the wonderful research and very professional work she did on a very tough subject in a very polarized world, as we all know. So I'm really very happy to be here with you, just to thank you all for all what you have said already on the importance of the addendum. And to echo what Baroness said, that we are not celebrating, we are merely commemorating. Of course, we acknowledge the importance of that when it happened. But when we see the state of our world today, we're a little bit more than angry, because like we were never listened to, including our GR30, which was well received, but never really very much implemented, acted upon, considered as a genuine soft law tool. And we don't want this to happen to the addendum. The addendum, with your help, with everybody's commitment, I hope will become an influential tool, and it will really translate in the very many areas that all of you spoke about. We cannot but cite the importance of this addendum by quoting our UN Secretary General, who had warned that there is a reversal of generational gains in women's rights. And this is happening exactly at this time, driven by rising global backlash, the resurgence of regressive ideologies. And it's not only in countries in the South, in many countries in the North. So nobody is immune to that unfortunate setback. At the same time, we know we lived it in our heart, the difference of the nature of the conflict and the new military technology. And I just came back from a 2-day meeting with the Meta group. You know, Meta is Facebook and WhatsApp and all of that, discussing exactly those issues of the role of technology in changing the warfare, and no limitation, no rules, no guidance. And even now the Secretary General is saying maybe in 2026 we will get an instrument, and by the time it is ratified, and artificial intelligence, God knows how much more damage will continue to happen. So it was clear that in this environment, our normative frameworks couldn't remain static, and they had to evolve to meet the threats of the turbulent century that we are in. This is precisely why the committee has developed the addendum, thanks to Professor Rangita, because it's a forward-looking, it's a proactive instrument. It's designed to ensure that the Women, Peace and Security agenda remains relevant, resilient, and operationally effective. Because until now, we did not feel the impact everywhere. We had some national action plan here and there, but honestly, we did not feel the impact that we were looking for, including on the several other resolutions that are equally important. The addendum matters now, as you all stated, because we know that when women lead peace, it is more durable and society become more resilient. And at the same time, we know how scarce peace builders, women, and how much they are underfunded and excluded from decision making. Very often, if they are there, they are window dressing. So it's not only a violation of their rights, but it's a strategic failure for global peace and development. When we were working with our colleague Nicole Ameline on GR40, and we really stated that parity is the only way, it's the only option, we find ourselves in the area of WPS very far from parity, from the proper representation, let alone parity. The addendum provides state party, including the UK. And here I would like to open a bracket to acknowledge all the work done by your both roles, both Baroness, with relation to WPS and by the UK parliamentarian group, because this can bring an expanded and actionable roadmap to correct the course of action. And I hope for the draft law that you are still battling with, that it will progress in the right direction. The addendum reimagined the very concept of conflict in today's world. It moved beyond the historical focus on sexual violence, but it did not diminish its importance, but it recognized new and emerging tactics of war, like was mentioned by my colleague, Professor Rangita, the intellectual violence and the issue of access to education. Food insecurity was mentioned also by many others as a weapon of war, violence fueled by the illicit trade in small arms and the exploitation of conflict minerals. All of that you mentioned, but this is exactly where there is no possibility to influence if there is no commitment to address the root causes. It also powerfully reframes sexual violence itself, recognizing it as a sexualized torture, and for the first time in this framework, identifies reproductive violence, including forced pregnancy, as a distinct violation of women's bodily autonomy. So this innovation ensures that CEDAW's guidance reflects the reality faced by women in conflict zone today, not the conflict of decades past. And we want to say how much we appreciate that the addendum is confronting new frontiers and global challenges. It extends the agenda to areas that were unimaginable when Resolution 1325 was first adopted. Because, as was said also by previous speakers, the weaponization of artificial intelligence, the emergence of lethal autonomous weapons system, the gendered impact of the climate crisis, including displacement, conflict over resources, and heightened gender-based violence. This new arena of potential conflict, like was mentioned again by Rangita, outer space governance, the law of the sea, transnational criminal networks, where women are currently excluded from decision-making structure. There are no hypothetical risks. These are immediate frontiers of global security, and the addendum ensures that women's rights and participation are embedded at the outset, not as an afterthought. So forging a path to transformative justice is extremely important. The addendum lays out the robust survivor-centered justice framework that was alluded to also by USG Patten, and by also by Radhika. It calls on state to provide redress for the full spectrum of harms, including moral harm, such as psychological trauma and emotional anguish, transgenerational harm, acknowledging for the first time in this context the lifelong and inherited impacts on children born of conflict-related sexual violence. So this approach, again, places survivors' dignity and agency at the core of international response and peace-building processes, something that was very close to the heart of both Mrs. Patten and Mrs. Kozomar and Radhika. Now, I want to conclude by saying this is really, for us, the addendum is a call for action. Honorable members, this addendum is not merely a legal instrument. It is a tool for action, a guide for policy, and a call to the international community to fully realize the transformative power of women's leadership in peace and security. The UK has long been a champion of the WPS agenda, thanks to your leadership, and your leadership is continued to be needed now more than ever to ensure that the strengthened CEDAW guidance is reflected in national policy, international advocacy, and resource allocation. By integrating the addendum into your WPS implementation and foreign policy frameworks, you can help ensure that the next 25 years are marked not by regression, but by renewed commitment, innovation, and courageous action. This is our moment to secure a more just, peaceful, and inclusive future. And women must be at the center of that future. Thank you for your attention.
Nala, thank you. Thank you so much. And you really are emphasizing that this is more than a serious intellectual and academic paper by Rangita. It is a rallying cry. And we have to take on board the messaging in it, which is that war is changing. It is also taking up a whole lot of space in that in other nations, civic space is shrinking, and the opportunities for having a proper debate and campaigning around the way in which war is changing, and it's changing in ways that don't have rules to regulate what is taking place. And so I really want to reinforce what you're saying about how this is something that we must use as a rallying cry for change. And now I'm going to ask Nicole Ameline, the former Minister of Gender Equity in France, and she sits on the CEDAW as a committee. She's a member of it and rapporteur of GR. And it's lovely to see you again, Nicole, welcome. And we look forward to hearing your words.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor and a very big pleasure to be speaking in this brilliant panel, and I would like to thank you, of course, the International Bar Association, and it's my pleasure to meet again my dear colleagues from the CEDAW Committee and the other panelists. I would like first to thank UK for joining the group of states committed on a feminist foreign policy. Recently in Paris, the CEDAW was here. But we consider that maybe it can be a very good vector, a very good instrument to promote the fantastic work done by Professor Rangita da Silva under the leadership of Narla Haidar. And I would crucial sector facing some new multidimensional crisis. Of course, we need to be very in a unity and solidarity, whatever our different responsibilities. I would like just to address 3 priorities. First of all, I would like to the CEDAW Committee because it's a demonstration that the CEDAW Convention is a living instrument. And maybe the most important thing today is to be able to adapt a normative framework precisely to the new disruptive context, connect women to the global issues and to, of course, to global defense and security, because it's probably our last chance to make the difference and to reach a new step, a new paradigm. And I would like to congratulate Professor Rangita because this addendum is absolutely an example of creativity, of intelligence, and we need this ambition now. We have to respond to the context with a very, very strong ambition. I would like just to say 3 things very quickly. First, adapting the law to the new challenge, the first priority, and this addendum propose a new roadmap, a new vision, a very comprehensive and systemic approach, and I think that it is this sort of text that we need now. And I appreciate particularly that the fact that the combination between this text and the GR40, because as Narla said, nothing is more important today than giving the capacity to women to decide for their lives, for their bodies, for the future of their nation. And time has come for action. Second priority, innovation. And I think that this addendum provides a very, very good example in terms of innovation on concepts and procedures. And I think that, of course, about intellectual violence, or the vision of what can be a gender apartheid, it's really a new step in our understanding of the world and the changing nature of conflicts and situations for women now. And I think that it is a very, very strong example of what we have to do all together to reshape our vision, to reshape the concepts, and to be really in phase with the disruptive context. And third, I would like to underline the importance to promote a new multilateralism. And precisely coming back to the summit on feminist foreign diplomacy, I note that the political declaration includes, of course, WPS challenges, and we have probably to use it to create a new awareness all over the world. And I think that we need more accountability. So my last remark is about the mobilization of states, of course, but not only, of international organizations, but also, of course, of civil society, academics, and others. And I think that it is probably our job today to create around, and this panel is really very, very emblematic in this regard. We absolutely need to create a sort of new organization. And personally, because I'm former member of parliament and former member of the Parliamentarian Assembly of NATO, I think that we have really to create around WPS a new mobilization. And I propose a global partnership for parity at the global level, but with a strong priority on WPS. We need an international network on this subject together with the states, and we need really to move beyond the commitments. We need to move to action, to projects, based also on new technologies, because I do think that we have to use it. But this addendum will be definitely a very, very strong and potent resource, not only to protect and to promote women's rights, but to create a new paradigm based on a full and inclusive participation of women in all decision-making process. This is the change. This is the radical change the world needs today. And this important field can be probably the first step that we have to consider and to succeed. And if we do so, it will be the best result this year. Thank you very much.
Can I just thank you, Nicole, because you've articulated something that I've been feeling as I've listened to the incredible range of participants, that we do have to create some sort of new paradigm, and that and you even mentioned a sort of new form of multilateralism, which is not in any way, in my view, I mean, we need the United Nations, we need that, I mean, hopefully reformed, because I think that aspects of the Security Council worry me. But I do think that listening to this group speaking, that maybe we should think of it being the start of something about an intellectual small group who really have a rethink about some of the ways in which we've worked on this in the past, to create a certain amount of dynamism around this, because the processes that currently exist end up being so slow in their effort to be inclusive, and so I don't doubt the value of that, but sometimes it means that that we don't move with the swiftness and the alacrity that is needed for the urgency of the situation. And it was listening to the idea that, you know, we could, in trying to create the rules and regulations around, for example, the new technologies and how they're impacting on war and impacting on security and so on, is that to some extent, perhaps some of the hard graft, the hard work on this should be done by a small group of us working together and listening to the brilliance of the contributions I've been hearing in this last hour. Makes me think that perhaps we should create a task force that can start thinking of taking this forward under the sort of the banner of Rangita and the wonderful piece of work that she's done on this addendum. So I just wonder if we can think about that and talk about it perhaps as we come to an end. I'm going to move us now to, I wonder if Stephen Rapp is around, because he spoke about...
I'm here.
Stephen, are you able to speak to us?
Well, I hope so. I'm on a stop train for the last 2.5 hours, and the signal isn't very good, but I've listened to much of it. But if just add a few comments here.
If you can make a quick sort of set of you know, so that we don't lose you, but we can see you and we can hear you, so go for it. But be
okay. Well, let me go for it before the signal ends or the train starts. If you can see me, but I did. You know, one, I'm very pleased to be part of this commemoration of the passage of 1325, and that has, for those of us that have prosecuted international crimes, been so important, particularly in its call for an end to impunity for international crimes, where there's particularly those of sexual violence against women and girls. And you know, we've of course had some progress, indeed, in the first 10, I say, of the 25 years. Since the passage of 1325, we had historic convictions at the international level, like at our Sierra Leone court, for sexual violence, including rape, including sexual slavery, including historically the creation of really a new crime of forced marriage. But since then, and particularly because of the resistance of great powers, and because we don't have the kind of international support that the ad hoc tribunals had when at the ICC, you know, we've had enormous setbacks. I tend to see the bright side in every story, and as I travel the world around 200 days a year and work with organizations at the grassroots that are building the evidence and building the cases in Ethiopia and Sudan, and South Sudan, and DR Congo, and elsewhere, I see that the accountability, the demand for it is never greater, but it requires you know, people building cases and finding ways into court. We see that happening amazingly still. Last year in Guinea, for instance, the stadium massacre and mass rapes of 2009 finally saw justice, with military officers, including a former head of the military junta that ran the country, held to account. We've seen sometimes in the Congo some great progress. I was with Dr. Denny Mukwege last night in the program in Washington, and he described, you know, the rapes that were happening in Kavumu, north of Bukavu, where he treated more than 200 girls, young girls, preteen girls, who were raped there, including by very powerful individuals. And by moving through their justice system and demanding it, and by the bravery and the courage of those victims and survivors, it was possible to hold those people to account. Of course, now we have the tragedy of the takeover of M23 of Eastern Congo, of the difficulty of moving forward with those very cases. I think, however, that as we look, and as I heard the discussion about multilateralism and the challenges of it, it requires, you know, coalitions of the committed. It requires states even without the United States, certainly without Russia and China, but relying on people in the global South to build coalitions to achieve accountability. And because it's without it, these crimes continue. McQuaggy talks about the fact that after those prosecutions in Kavumu, the number of people they were treating dramatically reduced for more than a year. And if we have that kind of thing, we can protect people. But if we don't, we see the kind of crimes that we today see in South Sudan, particularly in Sudan, particularly in El Fasher. So happy to join this commemoration. Sad about the lack of progress, but committed to carry this work forward in partnership with all of you.
Stephen, let me, I didn't introduce you properly, and I know that you're known to, I expect, almost every single one of us. But Stephen, your work, when you were the ambassador at large for war crimes, and you were the chief prosecutor, as everyone knows, at the Special Court for Sierra Leone. You've done the most extraordinary work, and you continue to do so. And I don't know how you have a life, because you spend your life traveling and dedicated to this important plank of your existence, which is to really end impunity and to secure accountability in some of the most grievous crimes happening around our world. And so it was great that even on your train, you managed to make a contribution to this session. So thank you for that. We wish you well and good luck in the work that you're about to do and the speaking engagements, the many of which you have. But you continue to do extraordinary work. And it's been a privilege having you with us. Thank you. Thank you. The one man amongst all these women, but very much appreciated for making your time. Thank you. And I'm going to now turn to Evelina Okab, who is my colleague at the Institute of Human Rights of the International Bar Association. And she does great work on atrocity crimes and has been doing really important work on sexual violence in conflict. Evelina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Baroness Kennedy, Baroness Hodgson, Professor Rangita, and so many wonderful distinguished speakers. I welcome the addendum as an important contribution to the work on women, peace and security agenda. The addendum reminds us that the way wars are waged continues to change, and so must our understanding of armed conflicts and atrocity crimes more broadly, and the impact on women and girls. I will briefly comment on 3 issues raised in the addendum, starting with victim-survivor-centric approach. I particularly welcome the addendum's reminder about the importance of and progress made so far in relation to accommodating the victim-survivor-centric approach in this work. No decisions about victim survivors should be made without them. Unfortunately, as we see too often, victims and survivors are excluded from the tables where decisions about their lives and their futures are being made. Furthermore, too often victim survivors are not provided with the assistance and protection they need to be able to participate in justice processes. And Radhika mentioned the case of Akayesu, but we've seen the same issue across so many trials in the DRC, but also we see how victim survivors do not want to participate in trials, especially, for example, in Iraq, because they do not trust in the process. Second, in relation to early warning signs, the addendum makes an important reference to early warning gender indicators. The addendum calls upon states to develop gender-specific indicators. And I would add also here that we also need the UN to do the same. Among others, the UN Framework for Analysis of Atrocity Crimes needs to better incorporate gender indicators for atrocity crimes. The UN framework requires further attention to ensure that, for example, sexual and reproductive violence is fully reflected, but also other developments from recent years, including the use of technology, social media, and AI. And this brings me to the third point, technology, social media, and AI. I welcome the addendum to recognize the role of technology and AI that must become our everyday language, as it is indeed the everyday language for waging wars and atrocity crimes. We do not have to look far. Daesh, also known as ISIS, mastered the world of social media and technology to recruit new members, to spread extremist propaganda, including against the Yazidis, and to accommodate abuse of Yazidi women and girls they abducted and enslaved. As cyber-enabled crimes become part of armed conflicts and atrocity crimes, we need a better understanding of these practices and also how to address them. Recent years have seen several examples of very strategic use and misuse of technology, AI, and social media for the commission of atrocity crimes, be it by Daesh against Yazidis, by the Tatmadaw against the Rohingyas, by Russia against Ukraine, and the list goes on. What does it mean in terms of our preparedness and capacity to monitor, analyze, and respond to such crimes? In short, we are behind. We are behind the perpetrators in realizing the significance and the power of technology and AI and social media. We are also behind in addressing the risks they pose in exacerbating such crimes. As it stands, the key framework for analysis of atrocity crimes, currently more than 10 years old, is outdated and does not address these developments in the use of technology, AI, and social media in the commission of atrocity crimes. This failure means that, as it stands, by default, our capacities and capabilities to identify early warning signs and risk factors are significantly diminished. This before we even consider that, as it stands, only a few countries in the world monitor and analyze early warning signs and risk factors of atrocity crimes, the fundamental work for prevention. This addendum recognizes areas where more work is needed and should guide us through our future work for women, for peace, for security. Thank you, Helena.
Thank you so much, Evelina. I mean, Evelina has been at the heart of a project that is very dear to me, in that we are really working on setting up early warnings, an early warning sign set of commissions in countries around the world. We should, all of us in our foreign, in our diplomatic corps and so on, we should all of us have a specialist unit that is flagging up the signs that there are, the early warning signs of, and often it's about discrimination, often it's about attacks on minority communities and so on. If we were to go back to the Holocaust, you would find that there were early warning signs of the trajectory that was being traveled, which led ultimately to the concentration camps and the extermination of so many people. And so we have to have that in mind, that there are signals of these things, and if we don't address them at those earlier points, then unfortunately we end up with the possibilities of genocides and other grievous crimes against humanity. And I wonder if this is the point at which we're going to play the video that we were going to play. Evelina, is this our moment?
Yes, it is.
Thank you, Rangita, and all who were engaged in the development of CEDAW's Transformative Women, Peace, and Security Addendum to mark the 25th anniversary of the UN Security Council's adoption of the framework on WPS. The Security Council formally recognized that peace is inextricably linked to the inclusion of women, their voices and experiences. Their leadership is essential to global peace and security. The anniversary of WPS comes at a time when conflicts are raging and becoming more deadly. Moreover, the planet is burning, and authoritarian pushback appears increasingly determined to turn back decades of progress on gender equality. This addendum couldn't be more timely. I see the report as an important new tool to broaden and update our collective understanding of WPS in today's world. Hopefully, this will contribute to greater effectiveness and to its integration into all policies, processes, and programs. This addendum also underscores the evolving nature of conflict and the need to ensure that the framework continues to be relevant to today's world. It cannot be static, but needs to build on the strong foundation laid out in the report. The changing face of conflict is an important factor, Whether, for example, it's in the application of new technologies like AI, or the nuclear threat, or so much more. And the discussion in the report of conflict-related sexual violence and gender-based violence expands on a more constricted understanding of the issue. It expands the lens of CRSV and puts greater emphasis on the survivor-centered approach. This discussion also comes at a crucial time as we are witnessing the greater weaponization of CRSV and greater impunity, as well as the need to do more in the area of reparations. We at the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security recently released our index on WPS that ranks over 170 countries on the well-being of women. We measure that well-being across 3 dimensions: inclusion, justice, and security. And countries where the status of women is low find themselves mired in instability, in fragility, and yes, in conflict and war. Clearly, the well-being of women and the well-being of nations goes hand in hand. Further, the addendums focus on existing international laws and interpretations of those 9 additional resolutions to 1325 is invaluable. And you are demonstrating the importance of upholding the laws and policies. Climate change is another area that you focus on, and an example of the value of this report. Climate change affects everyone, but not equally. Women are disproportionately affected by its impacts and the burdens it imposes on health, economic livelihoods, and more. But women are also powerful actors in combating climate change, and their full participation needs to be understood and recognized. Climate change is a threat multiplier, rendering societies more vulnerable to conflict or relapses to violence. It is a growing security issue. 13 of the 15 countries most vulnerable to climate change today are also experiencing conflict. And the addendum reviews policy advances from that UN agency on dealing with climate, the UNFCCC. Your report also underscores the link between GBV and natural disasters. And yet very few national action plans on WPS include a reference to the threats imposed by climate change. In sum, this report addresses many important issues related to women, peace, and security. It should be a companion to all of us working in this area, and as it will help us to do a much better job. Thank you for this effort, and thank you for continuing the work in this space.
Now, as I mentioned to everyone at the beginning, we're going to have 2 more messages that have been sent. One from Zili, who was she's the former Vice President of South Africa, and she's a rather incredible person, Secretary General Executive Director of UN Women. And she's got a message which will be part of the record of this event. And there's another message from Irina Bakova, the former DG of UNESCO. And again, she sent a really terrific message, and you will be able to access that on the record of this event. It will be part of this recording.
I greet you in this commemoration of 25 years of implementing Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. I'd like to pay my respect to the women we've lost in these many years in their fight to make the world better for women who are affected by conflict. I also want to thank the women all over the world who are working for peace. who also have made sure that the world changes and recognize the price that women pay in times of war and conflict. Because of Resolution 1325, yes, there has been more women who have appeared in peace processes, but not enough. We have more peacekeepers who do exceptional work when they have been deployed. But we have so many things that have not gone right. Violence, especially sexual violence against women, continue to traumatize many women and girls all over the world. In 2025, for instance, we have seen so many women and children who have died in conflict in Gaza, in Sudan, and the war continues in Ukraine. The sad thing is that the permanent members of the Security Council are also the ones that are fueling the arms race by the amount of money they spend on arms. This is a challenge we all face because the Security Council is supposed to be a place where peace is being made, not a place where those who contribute to war sit. We also have a world that has changed for the West. We have democracies with leaders elected democratically, who then become the most undemocratic leaders, and they create complex situations for women. When the ecosystem of the world cracks the way it is now, that is not a safe world for women and girls. The expenditure of countries on programs that can advance peace and security for women is just too insignificant. Much more is needed in order to make sure that we can implement programs that will create the changes that we want. So I appreciate the addendum on women, peace and security that is being presented in order to improve the implementation of this important resolution. And much more still needs to be done in order for women and girls in every part of the world to have a much better life, to be saved from the horrific sexual violence that we have seen. We hope that the many women in civil society, in public sector, in private sector, in communities will continue to stand with women who are affected by conflict in post-conflict situation where so much reconstruction is still needed. Thank you.
Baronesses, ministers, ambassadors, dear Nahla, dear Rangita, Melan, Radhika, it is difficult to enumerate all the friends and colleagues that are taking part in today's meeting. I would like first and foremost to express my deep regret for not being able to join you online today. This is indeed a very important meeting that not only celebrates and commemorates the 25th anniversary of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, but most importantly, focuses on the newly released addendum to General Recommendation 30 on women in conflict prevention, conflict and post-conflict situations. Let me also commend the United Kingdom's all-party parliamentary group on women, peace and security, and also the group on international law, justice and accountability for supporting this initiative. The addendum indeed reinforces the interconnected nature of today's security challenges and responses. This interdependencies informs an ambitious set of norms built on the bedrock of women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in conflict resolution and peace building. So it is against this background that I would like to bring forward to the discussion an issue close to my heart, the link between the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 and the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2347, adopted in 2017 on the protection of cultural heritage in armed conflict. At first glance, these two resolutions deal with different issues. One focuses on gender and participation in peace building, and the other on cultural heritage and identity. But I do believe they are deeply interconnected through their shared concern with human security, inclusive peace, and sustainable recovery. Both resolutions affirm that peace and security are not only military or political, but also they have humanitarian and cultural dimension. Resolution 1325 broadens the meaning of peace to include women's participation, protection, and rights in conflict and post-conflict settings. Resolution 2347 expands the same agenda by asserting that attacks on cultural heritage are also attacks on the identity, dignity, and stability of communities, thus a security issue, not just a cultural one. Both challenge the old, narrow view of security as purely state or territorial, and instead promote a human-centered approach. Resolution 1325 emphasizes women's agency in peace building, not just as victims, but as leaders, protectors, and mediators. In many conflicts, women are the custodians also of culture and heritage, in fact, of identity, through oral traditions, art, education, and broadly, community life. Therefore, I do believe that implementing Resolution 1325 naturally supports the goals of Resolution 2347 and vice versa, empowering women also in heritage protection, reconstruction, and reconciliation. Peace brings peace and post-conflict stability and resilience. We know that in so many cases, women's cultural knowledge and leadership are vital for restoring communities' identity after conflict. And also, protection and restoring of cultural heritage, including with women's participation, is an important part of post-conflict recovery and reconciliation. Thus, and I would like to bring once again this to the debate, while Resolution 1325 highlights the need for women's full participation in post-conflict reconstruction and governance, Resolution 2347 addresses reconstruction of destroyed heritage as a form of reconciliation and peace building, and supports women's full participation in post-conflict reconstruction and governance, restoring what binds communities together. Because we know when women participate in these processes, recovery is more inclusive, locally grounded, and sustainable. There are plenty of examples here to bring to the debate. Syria, Iraq, where women have played central role in community-level heritage restoration and education programs supported by UNESCO, by UNDP, and many other United Nations entities. So finally, both resolutions promote prevention and resilience. Empowered, inclusive communities are more likely to protect both people and their heritage. In a way, their complementary roles are visible in sustainable peace. Together, they support human-centered peace, ensuring that both people and their cultural identity survive and thrive after conflict. I would strongly argue that Security Council resolutions 1325 and 2347 are complementary. They recognize that peace requires the participation and protection of women, but also that peace requires the protection of cultural heritage through the leadership of women. Both affirm that security is rooted in human dignity, identity, and inclusion. Because we know that when women lead in safeguarding her heritage, rebuilding communities, and shaping reconciliation, they embody the link between empowerment, gender equality, cultural identity, and sustainable peace. I believe this is why this meeting today is so important, and I wish you a very fruitful deliberations. Thank you for your attention and looking forward to the conclusions of today's meeting.
We're coming to the end here, and I just wanted to say to all of you what a privilege it has been. I mean, this has been the most extraordinary, just the most extraordinary gathering. And I hope others who have been listening, and we've got quite a number of participants basically, but who are non-verbal participants. And I just want to thank them for joining us too. This is such an exciting moment because I feel energized by hearing you all. I feel so stimulated that we really have to move with this and move with as much speed and with as much voice as we can, that we have to find our own megaphone for getting the word out, that there's an urgency about having a rethink on some of these things. And Rangita, you have been at the heart of this. You've made this event, you made it happen. You came to us at the IBA and said, surely here is something that the International Bar Association, led by some women when it comes to the Institute, not too many women elsewhere, but that we take this agenda really seriously. So I just want to thank each and every one of you. I thought it was so stimulating to hear you. What a group. What an amazing group. And I hope those who listened in felt the same way as I did listening to you all. I feel privileged to have moderated this event. I want to thank all of you, and we will make something happen through this. I'm going to get the Institute to do a sort of we'll have our own think about what the next steps might be. But one of them will be to have an event, a much wider seminar, and to draw in as many women's organizations as we can, and to say this has to be at the top of our agenda. A world full of conflict, a time which is actually quite dark, but there can be some light, but women have to be in there, and we have to be making our voices heard in these negotiated settlements ending conflicts, that we have to make sure, whether it's the Israel-Gaza, whether it's that whole struggle to get peace between the Israel and the Palestinians, but also Ukraine and Russia, that we can't have women excluded from this, and we can't have the crimes that have been committed against women excluded from all of this. And so we have to have our voices heard, and I'm damned if I'm going to let it be that we're going to be kept quiet. No silence from now on. Okay, thank you all. It's really wonderful. I'm grateful to you. What a great event.
Thank you, Baronesses, and thank you, Evelina, and thanks to all my colleagues, and big hug to Rangita and Nicole. Bye.
Yes, Nicole, Rangita, Radhika, all of you.
Radhika, bye-bye. Big hug to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.